Baldur's Gate 3 is one of the best RPGs ever, if not the best. There are a lot of reasons for that. Incredible character interactions, all the characters that you meet are very interactive. You can have all sorts of different conversations with them, especially your party. There's fun and addicting combat, obviously, all the different variations that you have with the classes and that whole system and how all of that interacts with the world. Insane variation depending on what choices you make, not only in the combat, but in the story and all the different things that you can do that change the way that you play the game and the story as you're going through it. And it obviously also has cinematic storytelling, so that is something that they've been pushing a lot in Baldur's Gate 3, or they did push a lot in Baldur's Gate 3. The alternatives may not necessarily have all of that and all at different varying levels, but there are games out there that do various parts of this very well and should sate RPG players hungry for a beautiful new story. So here's a few games to go check out that are like Baldur's Gate 3. The obvious answer for this, and the one that I think people should check out immediately, but may not necessarily think to, is Divinity Original Sin, and especially Divinity Original Sin 2. It's basically a precursor to Baldur's Gate 3 in a lot of ways, at least in terms of the engine. It's entirely turn-based combat, so you'll get a lot of similar types of combat that you got in Baldur's Gate 3. A lot of the focus is on the surfaces, so that's a little bit different. You manipulate the surfaces to do damage and to kind of change how the elements interact with each other. For example, there is poison gas that you can hit with fire, and it does a nice little explosion. It plays out very similarly to Baldur's Gate 3 in a lot of different ways, in exploration, combat, and even in story beats. It's a little more primitive in terms of cinematography and things like that. It doesn't necessarily have the same production values that Baldur's Gate 3 does, but it's pretty close actually, and it's still very fun to look at. So it is well worth a playthrough, and there is also multiplayer too, so you can play with your friends. Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 by Obsidian have a good amount of similarities with Baldur's Gate 3. The combat is primarily real-time with pause, so that's a little bit different, though they do have a turn-based option, which is my preference, even if it's a bit janky. It also has a well-developed and a beautiful world with a ton of lore. It is absolutely stacked with lore, so all you D&D fans, you'll definitely be right at home in this world. There are varied characters from a variety of different backgrounds. They're fun to get to know, and the second game even has romance. The first doesn't. Obsidian's a bit weird about that, actually, but the second game does have romance. It's not super in-depth, but it's still fun. The world is split into regions and a style more similar to the original two Baldur's Gate games, so if you want to get kind of a taste of that, you can get that with Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. It has a ton of content and DLCs, so it'll take a lot of time to go through everything, and it's all very high quality. So that is definitely a game that I would recommend. You can get it on PC. Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous is a very different take on this style of game, and it's absolutely massive. Each playthrough can take potentially over 100 hours if you choose to do any side content at all. There's a lot here that will jive with Baldur's Gate 3 fans. Varied choice with consequences, so depending on what you choose, there are so many different things that can happen. There are a lot of different unique characters, so an entire party that you can get to know. And there are also unique builds. And to expand on that last one, they really take this to the next level. Depending on your choices, you open up what are called mythic paths. Without spoiling, these are crucial to the way that your character's story plays out. But it also affects the abilities that you can get, which can lead to entire different transformations for your character, literally and narratively. So it's a lot of fun. I think people definitely kind of skip over that game, Wrath of the Righteous. I don't think you should. I think you should check it out. It's so good. Go check it out. It is on PC, so you can get it there. And for those who would prefer a sci-fi spin on this, Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader comes from the same company. It has a lot of the same ideas. A lot of it kind of feels similar, but it's very different. It's not the Pathfinder rule set, obviously, but it goes really deep into the lore of the 40k series. All sorts of monstrosities can be found in the void of space, including monsters and your friends. So that's fun to kind of see how it plays out. You can control an entire ship as the Rogue Trader. A Rogue Trader is a person with massive power within the 40k universe, the power to bend entire worlds to your will. And the question that they pose in the game is, what will you do with that power? You can destroy things, or you can unite, and many things in between both of those. Both of these games are incredible, both Wrath of the Righteous and Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader, so they're both well worth playing. Dragon Age Origins is definitely a game you should check out if you like Baldur's Gate 3, or maybe even just old BioWare in general. It has tactical combat, and they emphasize that, requiring, strategic positioning, the use of your various abilities and all of that stuff. So you'll definitely get it there. It is a bit more real-time with pause than turn-based, but it's still a lot of fun, really strategic. There are moral choices in the game, obviously, that you'll get to do and choose how things kind of play out towards the end of the game. Companion interactions, there's a ton of those. This is a old BioWare game, so there are so many interesting characters that you get to know, and they all have their own side quests that you get to go through. Lots of dialogue options, something that is very classic to this particular series. A ton of different things that make you feel like you get to choose how things play out. Obviously, exploration quests, all this stuff that you came to love in Baldur's Gate 3. It feels a little bit like the predecessor to Baldur's Gate 3 in a lot of ways. Not so much like Divinity Original Sin did, because that was more of like the engine felt very similar. This is more of like the themes and the overall way that things play out. It also has dark fantasy themes, so that's great. One of my favorite genres. So I think this is one that people should definitely check out. Go try Dragon Age Origins. Now, for the sci-fi version of this, you can always go to Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. It's a bit of an older game, but it holds up very well, and it has a really good sequel too, so you can get more from that. There are lots of similar ideas, and it kind of feels, again, like an origin for this style of game. I think BioWare set up the formula for a lot of these styles of games. There are in-depth character interactions, simple combat this time. It still works well. But it is a bit more simple. It's like real-time with pause again, but limited ways to build and do that sort of stuff. It may be a bit older and maybe outdated for some people, but I think for the most part it holds up really well. So I don't think it feels outdated at all. But, your mileage may differ. All of that is set in the Star Wars universe. And it's a unique part of the Star Wars universe that isn't explored much, so people that love Star Wars will definitely love this game. You can see a line from Knights of the Old Republic in the way that it plays through all of the various BioWare games and into Baldur's Gate 3. That formula is there, and it's starting to really pick up in Knights of the Old Republic. This is also some of the first really cinematic storytelling in games, so obviously there are different ways to do storytelling. This kind of brought that movie sort of feel into it a bit more, which directly ties into what I think made Baldur's Gate 3 feel so great and made it really feel cinematic. So that is Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. You can check it out. I think it's on Switch now also, and it is also on PC. Wasteland 3 is a bit different, and it is good for people that especially like the exploration and combat part of Baldur's Gate 3. Definitely does still have moral choices that you'll be making as you go through, an interesting story, but doesn't quite focus on the characters in the same way that a lot of the other games do on this list, but still has a lot of the things that make, this style of game really great. Choices, consequences, all of it based on what you do. The combat specifically has a lot of similarities, being turn-based and more tactical. You have to put a lot of thought into the way that you take actions. It's a very different world. It's more of a post-apocalyptic setting, so that gives you something new, something different to explore. So all of the games on here are similar to Baldur's Gate 3, and I think they're all really good for people that are looking for that style of game. There are obviously a ton of different games that are in a similar vein, but I think these are kind of a really good starting point for people, giving you a bit of varied settings that you could want to check out. But if you have any games that you think are similar and that you'd like to bring up, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.